Welcome to the Dr. Broadway Podcast, the musical theater history podcast where a couple of doctors sit around and talk about Broadway. I'm your co-host, Dr. Kristin Stultz Pressley, joined as always by my co-host, Dr. Tracey Brent-Chessum. Tracey, it's a big day at the Dr. Broadway Podcast.
It is. It's a very big day. It's our 11th and final show-specific episode on the Tonys on Tour series, and it means the end of season 1. I didn't think we'd ever get here.
I didn't either. Who would have thought 16 episodes?
It
does not feel like we've done that many. Do you feel like we've done that many?
No, but we have.
I know we have. But it has been pure joy, truly.
This has been fun. This has been super fun. So
I agree.
Yeah. So we'll talk in a minute, I guess, about, if there's a season 2. Maybe we should wait till the end. No, let's do it now. Okay, anyway. But today we're talking about Kimberly Akimbo, which premieres on Broadway in 2022 and wins the Best Musical Tony Award in 2023. So most people have never heard of Kimberly Akimbo.
Yeah, it's very, very, very fresh. That's for sure. It's very, very fresh. So ideally, after you listen to this episode of the podcast, you'll at least know a little bit more about it. It is touring at the moment, as is suggested by the Tonys on Tour moniker. So find a city near you where this show is touring through. It's no longer playing Broadway, but you can see it across the U.S. at one of its many tour stops. So before we get into talking about the show, this feels like the last day of school, which is also appropriate for a couple of people who have spent their lives in school, right?
That's true. That's true.
So this pattern, which I don't even think we intentionally set out to do, it just so happens that our Tonys on Tour series ended just as, summer break was on the cusp. And we decided, you know what? This is kind of the rhythm of our lives as educators and as perpetual students. And so it felt right to say, we're going to take a summer. We're going to spend time with our families. We're going to do our own research interests and things like that.
And we're going to have major life events happen to us this summer. Again, that's something we'll bring back up, at the beginning of season 2.
We'll talk about that later. That's exactly right. So there are things going on this summer, but we're going to be taking a break from podcasting because it's summer vacation. That's what professors do. They take summer vacation. So I want to talk about what's going to happen upon our return, which we anticipate being just like a school schedule, end of August, 1st of September. So look for season 2, of the Dr. Broadway podcast coming then. And when we return, we do have plans for the structure that we will be taking with the shows that remain on tour. We're still looking to have an episode on file for each of the shows that are currently touring the U.S. So when we look at those shows that remain, those that have not won the Tony Award for Best Musical, and so we're not included in this series, the Tonys on Tour, we have a couple of different categories that we're going to break into. One is Hooray for Hollywood. We're going to look at those shows which either were adapted from a Hollywood film like Back to the Future or have been adapted into a Hollywood film like Wicked. And then after that, we've got a couple of mini-musters. That's another thing we professors are very, very familiar with, a mini-muster. And we're going to do a mini-muster of the jukebox musicals that are currently on Broadway. And then those most rare of breeds on Broadway, the all original musicals. So these are stories that have not been seen on film. They are written for the Broadway stage. And so we've got a handful of those on Broadway, including today's show. It was originally a play and then became a musical. But we'll get into that. So that's what's coming up from the Dr. Broadway podcast after our summer vacation.
Well, I'm going to say this because it is the last episode. I'm going to mention a funny from a listener. We have a listener way out in California named Amy Palermo, I believe. I may be slaughtering this. I should really know this. But she got in touch with us and said that she loved the podcast, and she's listening out in California. And thank you, Amy, for listening. But she has suggested our very own drinking game. I just think that that's funny. I was like, we have done this for just one season, and there's already a drinking game. So the drinking game is, and I would like to say that I don't think this is a drinking game so much as I think it's, to me, it sounds like suicide, but it's like you take a shot every time I say, or anytime Kristin says, nevertheless, or at any rate. And I was like, okay, just that first one, the ums, you're going to be under the table in about 5.5 seconds, friends. So let us know if anybody takes Amy up on her drinking game and how long it took for you to recover.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And do so at your own risk, by the way. Do so at your own risk. You know, it's so funny. Tracey had told me about that last week. And in the week between when she told me about it and today, I was editing a manuscript. And I was doing a final read through of some pages.
And you were like,
and I was like, holy cow, I used the word nevertheless a whole lot. So Amy Palermo from California, you have got my number. You are exactly right. I was like, there are a lot of neverthelesses on these pages, so I don't just speak nevertheless. I apparently write it as well.
It's all great.
Thanks for listening, Amy.
Yes.
I'm going to try to go today cold turkey, no neverthelesses. We'll see how long that lasts.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So with that said, let's get started, because judging by some of the reviews of Kimberly Akimbo, we may have saved the best show for last, right? Listen to these reviews. The New York Times called it the best theater of the year, a dose of pure joy. The Hollywood Reporter said, meet your new favorite musical. The Wall Street Journal said, the best new musical of the year by far. With accolades like that, which we all know do not come along often, it's not surprising that Kimberly Akimbo won the Best Musical Tony Award, right? Now, something that sets this show apart, we've alluded to this. I don't know that I've ever delineated it specifically, though I know that we have alluded to it through our 15 episodes or 16, whatever. Are we 16? 16, whatever episodes we're on. Most shows on Broadway today fit one of three categories, right? We have a lot of revivals, we have a jukebox musical, and we have film adaptations. It is very, 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 very rare to have an all original show, right? And this one, I think, fits that. It's adapted from a play by one of the writers of this musical. So I think it fits all original, right? But it's a very rare breed on Broadway to find a story like this that hasn't been adapted from another very well-known source, right? So that sets Kimberly Akimbo apart. So having said that, that's probably another thing that I say a lot of, Amy. So count how many having said that.
Having said that, yeah. The thing about podcasting that nobody tells you, you learn a whole lot about the things that you say to try to figure out where your brain is going. And
that's exactly right.
Amazing.
Exactly.
It's a great teaching tool.
It absolutely is. So I mentioned that Kimberly Akimbo was adapted from a work by one of the creators of the musical. And that creator is, in fact, a playwright named David Lindsey-Abaire. And David Lindsey-Abaire grew up in a working class family in Boston. His mother, I believe, worked at a factory. His father, what I read was he was a fruit peddler. I'm not exactly sure what a fruit peddler is, because when I think
especially
fruit peddler,
in this day and age,
exactly. So that's why
he's a contemporary. He's not that old.
Exactly. This is he's not that much older than we are. So when I think fruit peddler, I think a man with a cart selling fruit on the street. And maybe that's what he did, and that's great.
I mean, we had that in Los Angeles a lot, but
maybe
seems a little odd in Boston.
Exactly. And a lot of times what you find, and Tracey, you know this from research, but a lot of times what you'll find is that writers are looking for creative ways of phrasing things. Yeah. So maybe he was a grocer, and they changed that to fruit peddler. Yeah. I don't know. Who
knows?
But nevertheless,
there it is.
He grew up in Boston. Let's leave it at that. He grew up in Boston. So he wins a scholarship when he's 11 years old. I mean, so very early on, he's showing the promise of being an outstanding student. He wins a scholarship to a prestigious private school in suburban Boston called Milton Academy.
Mm-hmm.
When he goes there, as you can imagine, he feels like an outsider, right? This is not his working class world. This is not where he was born. This is not his community. And so he's forced to learn, how do I grapple with navigating a space that is very foreign to me? And he was 11 years old. I mean, it took a great deal of adaptability for him to be able to do that. But when you look at his canon of work, you see a lot of his characters, including Kimberly Akimbo, doing the same thing. Like the leading character, Kimberly and Kimberly Akimbo. You see these characters doing the same thing, like trying to figure out how they can navigate a world that doesn't seem to fit who they are as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So while he is at Milton Academy, he begins doing theater competitions. He was known, as you can imagine, as the funny one. Surprise, surprise. He turns to comedy in order to fit in. Yeah. Which, again, that's a motif we see over and over and over. So his classmates call him the funny one. He starts writing a class review each year of high school. And, it becomes very clear that he's going to pursue a career in theater. And in fact, that's what he does. He studies acting at Sarah Lawrence College in Yonkers.
So he likes to be the outsider at this point.
Yeah, well,
Sarah Lawrence is historically
all women.
All women. It does include men now, I think.
Yeah, it integrated like in the late 60s.
Exactly, but still not a lot of men.
Right. It is an interesting choice. That's a great point. That maybe that, he's the outsider at Milton Academy. It only felt natural for him to go someplace where he would be the odd man out, quite literally.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes to Sarah Lawrence, studies acting, graduates in 1992. He then goes to work at a dance company in New York, but he also keeps writing. And a couple of years after he graduates from Sarah Lawrence, he wins a scholarship to Juilliard's playwriting program. So again, we see him hitting pay dirt with from an academic perspective, right?
He's doing well.
Yeah, he does very well, getting the scholarship first to Milton Academy in Boston and then to Juilliard's playwriting program, of course, in New York. 3 years later, he has his off-Broadway debut. Mm-hmm. So it feels like a meteoric rise, right?
Yeah, like that happens really fast.
Yes, it's a very quick rise. In 1999, his play Fuddy Mears plays the Manhattan Theater Club. And if you don't, that play, you may be familiar with it, but if not, it's about a woman. She's got amnesia and she's trying to kind of rediscover who she is. And there's all these crazy characters who are in and out of her life who may or may not be who they claim to be. And so it complicates, of course, her recovery process as she's trying to recover her memory. And that's Fuddy Mears. So that's 1999. It premieres at the Manhattan Theater Club off Broadway. Now, interestingly, it had incidental music composed by our man, Jason Robert Brown.
Yep.
Whom we'll all remember from episode 15, was the composer of Parade, just the year before this.
And Parade had just opened. So that's the thing that I think people don't understand. You can have something that gives you a lot of attention and still be like, I need my next job. I need my next job. So
yes.
This is the kind of thing that does help kind of provide that stability. So this is great.
Absolutely. So Jason Robert Brown writes incidental music, which we'll see happen again for several of Lindsey-Abaire's plays. And the artistic director of the South Coast Rep in Costa Mesa, California, commissions Lindsey-Abaire to write a play for them. So this is unbelievable, right? He starts Juilliard in 1996 on a scholarship in their playwriting program. 3 years later, he has a show off Broadway. And then that same year, the artistic director of the of the South Coast Rep in Costa Mesa, California, sees it and says, hey, why don't you write something for us? So he does. Lindsey-Abaire writes a play called Kimberly Akimbo. Now, let me tell you where this play came from. He was inspired to write Kimberly Akimbo when he asked a friend how his new niece was. His friend had just become an uncle. And so he said, "How's your new niece?" And his friend said, "Oh, she's amazing. She's 2 months going on 80."
Yeah.
And it was just one of those moments. I mean, we hear about these sorts of things all the time where somebody hears something and the way they take it is completely differently than the way that it was intended.
That's
but
a
nevertheless,
very accurate statement, though, about babies.
Very true.
All babies at 2 months old are going on 80. It's like,
very,
I need to nap.
true.
I'm so tired. I need
right.
to
Just eat, sleep, eat, sleep, eat, sleep. Yeah, exactly. So he, Lindsey-Abaire heard that and he said, actually, because my mind is so literal, I immediately pictured this tiny old woman, wise beyond her years, trapped in a baby's body.
It took a minute to be like, wait, what?
Yeah. So that is the inciting incident, which is another phrase I've used a lot on this podcast. But that is the moment where the idea is sparked for him. Now, as he's going through all these ideas and thinking about things and, the shape this play might take, he remembers a documentary he watched when he was a child about progeria, right? Which is this really pretty terrible genetic disorder where a child will age very rapidly. So, we've probably read about individuals who have this disease, and it's very tragic in a lot of ways because their lifespan is so short, right? The life expectancy is 14 years. Some children with progeria will live to be 21, but beyond that, it's very, very rare to live beyond that age with this particular ailment. And so he didn't want to write about that specifically because it was so very, very sad. So he didn't want to focus on that. But he did love the idea of thinking about how it required the person who was suffering with that ailment to really grapple with their own mortality and to live in every single moment, right? Because every single moment matters. And of course, if you know the play or the musical of Kimberly Akimbo, then you see how those themes recur over and over again. So that's what he was working with and where the idea came from for this play. Again, we have Jason Robert Brown, his buddy, writing a quote unquote jazzy soundtrack, as it was referred to in a review of the show, of incidental music. Now, this show premieres at South Coast Rep in the spring of 2001. So just 2 years after Freddie Mears had premiered off Broadway. So it plays South Coast Rep in 2001. And then his buddies at Manhattan Theater Club see it and say, hey, we want it too. So it plays off Broadway in 2003. Okay. And then that's really all we hear about from Kimberly Akimbo. Now, of course, David Lindsey-Abaire goes on to continue writing. He writes Rabbit Hole, most famously, which is a Pulitzer Prize winner for drama about a family dealing with the loss of their only son. That show also premieres at South Coast Rep in Costa Mesa, California in 2005, but it played Broadway for about 77 performances in the spring of 2006. He is, as I said, wins the Pulitzer Prize winner and continues writing. And he writes the adaptation of Nick Hornby's High Fidelity. So if you're familiar with that book or the film that starred John Cusack in the mid-90s, there was a musical adaptation with music by Tom Kitt and lyrics by Amanda Green, and a book by David Lindsey-Abaire. And it was a giant flop.
Yeah.
It played for 13 performances. Now, this was after 20-some previews, but 13 official performances after opening in November of 2006, and was enormously painful for the creative team, who had a very hard time grappling with the aftermath of that experience, right? But
why is that? What do you mean? I
think just I know, especially I've done a lot of work on Tom Kitt. And just the grief of going through something that doesn't survive. And it's also embarrassing, right? Yeah. And you, I think, second guess yourself. Am I doing the right thing? Was I cut out for this? I think a lot of that comes into your mind when you have a show that only plays 13 performances.
And it's interesting to kind of dig into that kind of psychology when you think about the fact that you know, we're not used to thinking about the celebrities or the creators of great art or whatever doubting themselves.
Oh, of course.
But doubt is what helps drive art. So, you know, like, I'm all, sorry, clicking here. But I'm always just so thankful when a creator will be like, I feel a little embarrassed because this thing that I gave birth to, I gave life, has now, no one likes it.
Right.
And we have to walk away with it, which is funny because it's not that no one likes it. People still do high fidelity.
Right.
All over the country, all the time. It doesn't not make the, you know, money. But it just didn't survive on Broadway that long.
Right. So, but I also think there's guilt attached to it. You mentioned money. I mean, think of how much people producers are putting up for shows. And if it doesn't run, I would think as one of the creators, you'd have to feel somewhat culpable for that, right? Whether or not you are, there's a million different reasons why shows don't hit. Mm-hmm. But I would think as a creator, one of the writers in particular, you'd feel culpable in some way, whether or not you should.
Because it didn't make back, the investment.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing. It's a hard business.
It is a hard business. That's for sure. For sure.
Anyway, tangent.
And how many, I mean, so many of the creators of musical theater, of creators, period, regardless, have that moment of this flopped.
Oh, you know, all of them do.
Absolutely.
Even the big, you know, even the ones that it's like, you know, you hear their names all the time. Everybody's got a flop.
Yeah.
If you're Sondheim, every show flops, and then you go back to it and fix it and do it again, and it flops again, and then you go back to it and fix it and put it up there until people like it.
Right. Well, speaking of Sondheim wanted to quit the business in the early 80s because he got such a terrible review for Merrily We Roll Along. So he was going to quit the business and be a designer of puzzles and games because he loved puzzles. And so he was going to do that. And then James Lapine came and said, hey, let's work together. And they ended up writing Sunday in the Park with George. So it all worked out.
Right, and then Into the Woods, which is huge. But then the next one, which I think was Assassins, just fell flat.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they reopened it without very many changes 10 years later. And boom, it's a huge hit.
It hit.
So you just don't know. Sometimes it just really can be
all on the timing.
You got there at the wrong moment or the right moment, which is you know, something we can talk about with Kimberly Akimbo. Yeah.
And another great example of that was Chicago, right? Runs for 2 years in 1975, and then it's been running since 1996. Its revival has been running since 1996. So it's all in the timing. So often it's all in the timing. But we digress. So back to High Fidelity. It flops. Everybody's sad. But David Lindsey-Abaire's sadness was short-lived because in 2007, he's informed that Rabbit Hole won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama, which I would imagine would be a spirit lifter if you're feeling down. Yeah. The next year, he writes Shrek the Musical, or he writes the book, rather, for Shrek the Musical. This show runs for 2 years, and it's very notable in the progression of our study of Kimberly Akimbo because it is where David Lindsey-Abaire meets composer Jeanine Tesori. Okay. So Jeanine Tesori is a name that we're all, I'm sure, familiar with, but just in case, here's a little bit more about her. She grew up in Long Island. She was one of 4 daughters in a Sicilian American family. She started playing the piano at 6 years old, and she is very quick to point out that her piano teacher was very willing to let her play whatever types of music that she wanted. She said he didn't judge anything that I brought and said, I want to learn this or I want to learn that. And as a result, we see that in the breadth of her work, right? How she can really capture a jazz age kind of sound with early modern Millie, but then you hear Violet or Caroline Change, and it's very soulful and gospel sounding, right? Yeah. But that goes back to she was allowed to play whatever she wanted to play. right? So there was some strength in that wisdom of her piano teacher. Well, as a teenager, she decides to rebel and she quits music for a while. She decides, I'm not doing that anymore. And even, in fact, almost studied pre-med at college, believe it or not. But ultimately, she comes back around to music and she studies music at Barnard in New York. And after graduation, she starts working in Broadway pits, right? She's the pianist in Broadway pits. She's working as a freelance music director. She's doing arrangements and orchestrations, and she works on shows like The Secret Garden and The Who's Tommy and the revival of The Sound of Music, which starred Rebecca Luker in the late 90s. And,
and Richard Chamberlain.
That's right. So for a number of years. And I only know that
because one of my prized possessions that my parents went to go see that show and bid on a poster that had everybody's name on it that they all had signed and everything. And like, I think I got that when I was like 18. I swear that thing hung in my bedroom. Like, it was
I believe it. I believe it. So for 10 years, that's what she's doing. Now she finally gets her chance to do her first original show on Broadway. She'd done Violet off Broadway in 1997, but her first original Broadway show is Thoroughly Modern Millie, one of my favorites, which famously stars Sutton Foster and premieres in April of 2002. It wins Best Musical, so if it were touring, it would be on this list. She then goes on to have a string of shows, Caroline or Change in 2004, Shrek the Musical 2008. Of course, she wrote Fun Home, for which she was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, though she didn't win it. She just worked very consistently on Broadway since this point. But let's park for just a minute on Shrek. Like I said, that's where she first crossed paths with David Lindsey-Abaire. And they loved working together. Shrek, as you can imagine, was a little bit of mayhem. There were a lot of cooks in the kitchen because it was produced by DreamWorks. So you had the studio people wanting to dabble in there. It wasn't, necessarily a traditional Broadway development process. And so during the experience, Lindsey-Abaire says to Tesori, I would love to work with you again, but just the two of us, right? So that we could take as long as we needed to. We don't have to have all the... all of the input from producers here and studios there and all of that. He really wanted to work with her without a big team of people interrupting them.
And if you see like their choices before and after Shrek, it's like, weird little thing, like weird, something about family psychology, whatever it is, Shrek. And then they go back to doing these kind of like weird, interesting takes about lives. Both of them do. I mean, you go to Fun Home. Fun Home is like, wait, what? We made a musical out of what?
Yes.
And like, these are real people. This is what real life looks like. But Shrek was in the middle there. And it's always funny. It always makes me laugh when you look at the list and it's like, Shrek just jumps out at you. And it's interesting to note that both of them have never done anything that big with like a studio before, anything quite like that. They're like, no, thank you.
Yeah, right.
One and done.
Right.
Did my job.
Yeah. But, I imagine, and I imagine that you would expect there would be a big payout for a show like that, right? It didn't. It only ran for, right. So you would think if I do this, you would think it would run forever. It ran for 2 years. It was very short-lived in terms of what the expectations were for Shrek. So you would have I'm sure, I don't want to speak for them, but I would imagine my thought process would be, okay, I'm going to take this one for the team and it's going to fund the rest of my work for the rest of my life. Right. I don't think it worked out that way, but I can imagine that being part of the thought process when you see this kind of work that is such an anomaly in the body of both of their works, right? You're absolutely right about that.
And it did get put on film, which musicals usually do not get put on film, but it is was a big, not blockbuster release or anything like that, but it was a release of the musical on film. You can still, you can see it on Netflix. It's really easy to find. But it's that kind of money that keeps it in the, they're getting a few bucks in their pocket at least. Yeah. But probably not what they thought they would.
Well, and interestingly, that show there's a non-equity tour of that show that's been traveling, and it's actually got fresh orchestrations. It's Lindsey-Abaire and Tesori went back and kind of did some revisions.
They're like, this is what we wanted to do.
That's right. That's right. That's right. If we had been allowed to, it would have been like this. And so they have revisited that in the years since then. So if you happen to see Shrek on tour currently, that's the production that you'll see is this kind of revised. I mean, it's mostly the same, but they did do some orchestration changes, and they did rework it.
And the original music in Shrek it's epic. They both love doing these little kind of viewpoint of humanity shows, but when they're faced with writing something that takes the hero's journey, they can write a good power ballad, those two. That is just for the show. Like the some of Shrek's music in that is pretty epic and pretty great.
Yeah, for sure. So at any rate, they worked on Shrek together. They loved working together. And Lindsey-Abaire says to Jeanine Tesori, let's do this again when we can do it our own way, basically. And when they came down to do it, when they decided, okay, now's the time, let's pursue this, Tesori said, what about one of your old plays? Why don't we adapt one of, why start from ground zero when we can already have basically the germ of a story? And so he said, that's an interesting idea. Which one do you think? And Kimberly Akimbo was on Jeanine Tesori's shelf, and she pulled it down and said, what about this guy right here? She said, I think this one has a really big heart in it. I think it sings. Now, having been around musicals as long as she had, she says, this is not surprising. She says she can feel it in her bones when a show sings, right? I'm not a musician. You are a musician, so you probably have more of that sensibility than I do.
You can feel it in your bones when you're reading something, you're like, this needs to be a musical.
Really? So can you explain that? So I don't have that impulse at all. What is it that makes something sing or not?
It's when it's the heightened text aspect of it. It's when you're reading it and the dramatic elements are so heightened. I feel it as I need to get out of my seat and walk around when I'm reading. Because I can't sit in my seat and read this anymore, because the next thing, that always tells me I'm supposed to start, this character's supposed to start singing at this point if I'm so excited
interesting.
About it. But yeah, I mean, it has to do with kind of the drama of it, I guess. And it's like the high stakes versus the other. But yeah, I mean, I understand that impulse.
Yeah, no, I figured you could.
I'm the person that carves paths around our living room when I'm working on something. So
yes, I love that. That is I don't have that sensibility at all. So I think that's so interesting. But obviously Tesori has it as well. And so she thought this was the show. In fact, she said, these characters remind me of the people I grew up with in New Jersey. And in fact, the show is set in New Jersey. So I'm sorry, she grew up in Long Island, New York, but nevertheless, very close by. So they felt very familiar to her. And Tesori and Lindsey-Abaire gave themselves the time and space that they needed to write it. They took 7 years adapting that show. Lindsey-Abaire, another thing that he had said was he wanted to write it like he wrote a play, which was quietly alone by himself, just toiling through, kneading through the story. And that's exactly what they did.
To think about it.
Yeah. Taking all the time that they needed. And they both had other things going on that took their focus. So it wasn't, concentrated 7 years working on it, but nevertheless, it took them 7 years to adapt it. And they compared it. I love this comparison. I believe it was David Lindsey-Abaire who said this. He compared it to working on a puzzle. He said, it's like dumping a bunch of puzzle pieces onto a table. It's hard when there are a lot of people working on it, but if it's just two of us, it's a lot easier. Yeah. So again, he's driving home that point of too many cooks in the kitchen is not conducive to creative.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
It's not conducive to creating. So, the thinking is if you've got one person working on the edge pieces and one person starting at the center, then you can meet each other, at some point. So that's the analogy he was making. So this show, after 7 years of work, premieres at the Atlantic Theater Company in November of 2021. I was about to say 1921.
Oh, no. No,
Lord have mercy. No, obviously I need a summer vacation. November of 2021. And it opened on Broadway a year later at the Booth Theater, November of 2022. It got 8 Tony nominations, obviously winning for Best Musical, Best Book, Best Score, Leading Actress, and Supporting Actress. So I want to talk a little bit about Leading Actress, because we were talking about this before we started recording. Victoria Clark, who is a very well-known Tony Award winner in her own right, played the leading role. She played Kimberly in the show on Broadway. On tour, it's played by Carolee Carmello, which is another connection.
Big
Parade.
Big name.
Yeah, real big name. So at any rate, when Tracey, I wasn't going to bring this up, but then when Tracey mentioned, how often there are failures or there's self-doubt in a creator's trajectory, that happened with Victoria Clark. And she didn't really want to even put herself out there for this show because she thought her voice was gone. She was 62 years old. She'd been performing since she was 6 years old. And she said, I mean, I'm not saying anything she didn't say in the New York Times, so it's not a secret, but she said, I went through menopause and I felt like my voice completely changed. And suddenly this instrument that I had relied on since I was 6 years old was betraying me and didn't sound like it previously sounded and like I wanted it to sound and like it sounded when I won the Tony Award for Light in the Piazza in 2005. She'd been a lyric soprano.
And it does sound different.
Yeah, it does sound different.
You hear it in there, but it's like hearing Julie Andrews sing now, and she doesn't anymore for a reason. And it is
that's
because
another great one.
Women's voices peak early and then at menopause, our voices do change quite a bit, and you can lose a lot.
Yeah.
Without a lot of careful taking. I mean, it depends on the person, I think, sometimes.
Right.
But, I mean, you don't often see the very, very, very old soprano in the opera singing the lead roles, but you always see the very, very old man playing the lead. And it's because men's voices don't do that. Men's voices don't peak till they're 30, 35. And then, it just stays kind of the same. And unless there's like a physical problem and they start going downhill, but they can go on forever. But she's right. When you listen to the difference, there is a difference in her voice. Her voice is just as good. She is just as like technically proficient. And I mean, it's just funny to hear you say that, because I was listening to that and it took me a while to figure out, oh, that's Victoria Clark, because she doesn't sound like herself.
Right.
She doesn't sound like what I was trying to listen to or what I thought I was listening for in 2005 for the Piazza.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I love the story, nevertheless, of how she got the job, even though she was full of self-doubt, like Tracey alluded to, and didn't really want to take it. She was on a board with Janine Tesori, and Tesori, they meet at this, or they don't meet, they were already connected, but they see each other at this board meeting. And while she's at the board meeting, Tesori texts Lindsey-Abaire and says, "It's Vicky." Like, she sees Victoria Clark and she's like, I know she's got to be Kimberly. She's got to play this part. At the time she was 62, Victoria Clark was 62. So she was right in the ballpark of what Kimberly, the character of Kimberly, looked like because of this disease that she had, right? So it was appropriate there. But what sold Tesori on it was, she said, she still has this light in her eye. She looks like she's just ready to go out and skip rope or, something very childlike. Yeah, exactly. So the hard sell, shockingly, was Victoria Clark.
Yeah.
Tesori says, "Listen, I've got this role. I want you to play it." And Clark says, "That's just not me anymore. I can't do it anymore." And Tesori didn't say, "You're an idiot. Shut up. You're Victoria Clark. Come over here and sing." She said, "Well, I want to hear you. I'm going to play the music for you. I just want you to hear it, and I want to see how you do with it." I mean, she approached it very with respect, gave space for Victoria's feelings about herself.
But also you can't say no to Janine Tresori, who's going to sit down at the piano and be like, I just want to hear it. Just hear it. And you're like, fine.
Yeah, okay.
You don't stand in the crook of the piano and go, no, I refuse to sing.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Especially not if you're Victoria Clark with that little glint. And if you've seen her in anything, you know that's so true of her. I mean, she just has a sparkle. She just has a sparkle. So she goes and she sings for Tesori, and, kind of the rest is history sort of thing. She ends up winning a Tony Award for taking the role that her self-doubt almost kept her from even, it's not even an audition, but for even, being seen for or heard from. So I think that's such a lesson that really goes back to the theme of Kimberly Akimbo, which is seize the day, right? Live every moment to the very, very fullest. So, Tracey, what thoughts do you have about this one?
Well, I just think, so we've talked about Victoria Clark, who obviously wins the leading actress, Tony Knob as well. I do want to just pause for a moment and make sure people understand, because we don't usually talk about the plot of the musical. But I'm sure people at this point are kind of going, wait, I think I must have...
You're right.
I did this at first. I was like, what is going on in this musical? So it becomes clear, obviously, when you have the visual of it. But we have a 62-year-old woman who's playing a 16-year-old because she has this disease that causes her to age rapidly. So she's 16 years old in life experience, in her likes and dislikes, in... the boys that she likes, in she's going to high school. It's like they're going to high school. And so all the people that she's interacting with are high schoolers, but she's 62. So she's like a 62-year-old woman in, knee highs and, a pair of Doc Martens kind of a thing. Like that's what you're seeing there. So I want to make sure that we do make that clear, because I was very lost.
And I'm really glad you pointed that out. I think this is one where that's very helpful. It's necessary to know, because it's a new enough story to 99.9% of us. If we haven't read that 2001 play by David Lindsey-Abaire, it's a new story to us. So I totally should have outlined that, and I'm glad that you did. Thank you for doing that.
I think it's easy to follow when you're watching the show, but it is not, it's not instinctive when you're just listening to the soundtrack or something like that. The other big Tony award that the show won, and then I think won the Drama Desk as well, was Belton Bonnie won Best Supporting Actress. Bonnie, I just know her as Beltine Bonnie. Why I'm having trouble coming up with her last name. Bonnie,
is it Mulligan?
Mulligan, yes.
Yeah.
So she's fabulous, y'all. She's amazing. So the first time I ever heard of her, I walked in and we got tickets for Head Over Heels on Broadway, and she played one of the main characters in Head Over Heels. And was just hysterical. I mean, she's a gifted comedian, and has a voice she can do anything with. I mean, her handle on Instagram and everywhere else is Beltine Bonnie for a reason. She's very talented, but does just have a knack for the comedy. And in this particular show, she basically plays the wayward aunt that comes in and causes trouble. Teaches everybody how to wash checks and commit check fraud. Like, you're like, wait, what is the show about? I was like, wait, they're doing what now? How's this happening? The show starts at like an ice skating rink, and everybody's like, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you, blah, 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 blah. And then there's like something about a mom. It just is very hard to follow if you don't have that through line.
No, I'm glad you said that.
But she is again, Bonnie is very, very gifted, and I thought brought a lot of levity, but also kind of groundedness to some of the, I'm just going to use the word weirder moments of the show, like check washing. Like all of a sudden, it's like you think this is like a story about two teenagers in love. And then all of a sudden you realize that Kimberly's life is so complicated because of, the family that she's put in the middle, right. in the midst of, and she's living in the midst of, and there's a lot of family drama that goes on around it that we won't talk about. But her aunt is essentially the wayward aunt. She comes and she enlists, Victoria and all her friends to help her wash checks so that they can make money. And the song she sings, you had talked to me about it. What's the title
Make
of
Your
that song?
Shitty Life Better.
Make Your Shitty Life Better is her first song in the whole thing. And it's basically a justification of like why we should take advantage of people. Do this. Yeah. Why we should take advantage of people. Yeah. Because my life isn't that good. And, I deserve to have a little fun basically every once in a while. But what I like about what Bonnie did was you could have taken those moments and it unhooked it from the show. And it could have gone wrong in so many moments. Yeah. But what she portrays in that is not only the comedy of it, because it is funny, but at no point does she seem to go the step farther where it's like you really are looking at a woman who's been broken.
Yeah.
By the system and how that all works. One of the things I want to talk about, two major things. And we'll kind of continue on. One of them is anagrams, and we'll talk about the title and everything in a second. But really coming back to that thing that I always come back to, which is how is this a mirror for society? Because we all look at theater, and if theater is going to be art, even if it's commercial art, and these two things are in kind of dramatic tension together, that's okay. But what purpose does this serve? What is the purpose of art? It's to kind of hold that mirror up to society. What mirror is it showing? And I'm struck by the fact that we seem to be turning a corner away from the classic hero's journey, and towards a journey that may look like the hero's journey, but is complicated by so many psychological issues, character flaws, etc., and so on, that it just doesn't look like the hero's journey anymore.
Right.
We're seeing more and more of that. If you have seen show we talked about a couple episodes ago, Dear Evan Hansen, we have the same thing that's happening there. I see a shift happening here. I know that in order to really cement a shift, we're going to need a lot of time. But this is what I'm looking at as I'm watching these shows kind of come off to get on the Broadway stages and things like that, is just that the hero's journey for the United States, for this audience that they're writing for, is changing. And I think it's something we need to pay attention to. The heroes are no longer people who do the right thing.
Right.
For, even against all odds. That's changing in America. And I think I don't want to say too much about it because we could get lost in ourselves.
Yeah.
We really could.
Yeah.
But I think it is something to pay attention to. When you're watching this show, looking at all of the moments where characters are making choices to help themselves rather than others, rather than the greater good, like that comes out too. But we're seeing this more than just once. It's not kind of a hiccup over here. I do think this is an interesting show to look at because it's the one that has made my mind go, I think our journey is changing.
Yeah.
I think that I think we're trying to embrace more complicated characters, and as such, because of how musicals work, we're trying to make them the hero of the story. And if this is a mirror for society, we have to start asking ourselves, when we make them the hero, what does that make us a better citizen? I'm going to come back to catharsis. I'm going to come back to Aristotle. Does this make us a better citizen?
Right.
And this is, I think, a really interesting question that we're going to have to kind of think through and wrestle with. Your brain is very loud right now, Kristin.
No, I keep thinking about Pal Joey, about, which is so random. I know that I'm thinking about
that is
Pal
very
Joey.
Random.
But Pal Joey, the Rodgers and Hart musical, was kind of one of the first times we see an anti-hero, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't become mainstream. I think what I was thinking was, she's right, we're seeing more of it, but then true to what we've said 657 times throughout the course of this podcast, never think it's the first,
No.
So something that was an anomaly when Rodgers and Hart wrote Pal Joey, where the anti-hero was front and center of the show, is becoming more and more commonplace now as our culture is changing. And that's what I was thinking.
But look at the last time that this has happened. That was the end of the 50s into the 60s, that then pushes us into a completely different world. As far as musical theater technique and structure goes, the thing I tell kiddos all the time is, like, you do not take history because you're supposed to memorize things.
That's right.
Take history to start recognizing patterns, because
that's right.
We, as humans, like, everything changes except humans. We are dumb, and we do the same things over and over again. And we can be relied upon in these kinds of moments to react in the same kinds of ways. It's unfortunate, but we do it. We don't learn from history, and people say that all the time, and they lament that fact. And I was like, that's humanity. Yeah.
Well, and I think but the other thing that I was thinking is, what does it say about audiences when they're cheering for anti-heroes, right? When you're willing to it's easy to get behind. I mean, another great example would be from earlier would be, oh gosh, what's his name? Pierpont Finch in How to Succeed in Business, right? Like, we're all cheering for that guy, and he's doing nothing. He's doing, that's the whole point.
But he smiles and sings and dances.
Exactly.
Really cool.
Exactly. So we do have these characters throughout history, but they're becoming more commonplace. You're exactly right. And I do wonder, what it says about the psyche of an audience when you're cheering for people that you probably wouldn't be cheering for if you knew them in real life, right? We wouldn't, if we met Aunt Deborah, which is the aunt character in Kimberly Akimbo.
Belton Bonnie plays.
And by the way, Bonnie is amazing. I also want to give a shout out to Emily Cook, who plays the role on tour. Yeah. She's phenomenal. She's a former Elphaba, and has stormed onto that role she's just incredible. But at any rate, if we met her, if we knew her in the real world, we would probably have a very different opinion of her than we do in watching that show, right? Because in that show, it's kind of fun to cheer for, because, oh yeah, go girl, make your shitty life better. Do whatever you got to do. Take that old woman's jewelry or whatever it is, But in real life, that would be scandalous. So I think it's just an interesting thing to think over. So that's why my face was like, those are all the things that are in my brain.
Well, and again, this is so early for historians to be talking about a work of art. It's very early, but this is what we do when we start kind of unpacking it. You're watching people leave and go and be like, are they talking about the inconsistencies and the anti-hero when they leave? A good portion of society, maybe no.
Right.
But part of that, and part of being an informed audience member, is realizing that musicals have what I teach the theater appreciation kids, so kids from all over the university, I teach them that musicals, you must be aware of the spoonful of sugar effect. What am I swallowing?
Yeah.
Right now, because it's hilarious, it's sweet, or whatever.
The music is making it, the
music
palatable.
can deceive us.
Yeah.
And if you are aware of that, then this musical becomes something that is, something that is incredibly helpful for society. It is incredibly thoughtful and asks us to really sit back and say, okay, what kind of world are we living in? That allows people to make these in some ways entitled jumps towards making my shitty life better, whatever that is.
Right.
But in this particular case, then watching a whole bunch of kiddos that haven't really had a shitty life jump on board and say, I'm going to do this because my friend had a shitty life.
Right.
And I'm going to attach myself to her.
Yeah.
She has a sad thing. Again, with that kind of same thing that we were talking about in Dear Evan Hansen. I just feel like these two really, really kind of match up in many, many ways. So, I think it can be a very, very instructive tool for society that we have to, once we get over that spoonful of sugar effect and we're like, that was a great song. I love it. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
I want everyone to sing it. However, what does that mean? If we're going to look at this as an informed audience member, what does that mean for us?
Right.
And what are we meant to be learning here? And is what we're learning instructive? Now, one of the reasons why I think that this is actually something that Tresori and Lindsey-Abaire is trying to do is because of the use of anagrams in the show.
Oh, talk about that.
So anagrams is how would you explain anagrams? I don't know. It basically, it's like taking a phrase or whatever it is and then mixing up the letters and making it something else. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So Kimberly's last name is Lavaco in the show. She's Kimberly Lavaco.
Right.
An anagram of Kimberly Lavaco in the show, they come up with Cleverly Akimbo. Cleverly, you get, okay. Akimbo is it's some sort of kind of I think what they said in an interview was like an African word for strength and power and things like that. But it doesn't really get addressed in the material that I've seen. But there's the boyfriend character who is 16 years old. He's a wordsmith and he wants to he just loves making an anagram out of everybody's name. And so he starts puzzling with Kimberly's name and they use kind of anagrams throughout. Ooh, I could make this, or I could use this, or this can be converted to X, Y, and Z. And so one of the reasons why I think the creators are kind of masking some of this on purpose is because of this symbolic anagram where it's like, I can be what you want to see.
Right.
Not necessarily what actually is. Even if I look different on the outside or whatever. I mean, you walk into this musical and you're really pretty convinced that her name is Kimberly Akimbo. Right. And I was like, is this about okay, I'm going to be very, very transparent here and say when I first heard Kimberly Akimbo, I started Googling and I was like, where are they coming up? What is Akimbo? And I did look up and it is in other languages, mostly kind of an African word. And I was like, so this is about an African and then I was like, wait, no, that's not what I'm finding in other places. But I mean, that's what your brain kind of goes to. It's what you see and what you hear is not necessarily to be. Right. And you are allowed to change how people see this, or you can change the way you look at it and therefore the way the world looks at it. And I think that's I don't think that that's a throwaway moment from the creators. Do you know?
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Like,
of course not.
I don't think they're choosing randomly. Let's just do anagrams. It's like, no.
Well, and in every script analysis class in the world, you're taught the importance of a title, right? Yeah. They don't waste the title.
No. And the title, and they did come back and they said, I forget. I should have kept that one. But they did come back and say that it is, symbolizing her strength and resilience, basically.
Yeah.
That they're using the, they're using the anagram's name to kind of rename her and send her out into the world. And again, it just asks us to really analyze. I don't think we don't do this enough. But without the analysis after the fact, we kind of miss the purpose, and shows just become, oh, that was fun, and that was a fun couple of songs, but they're really important,
right,
for our society. It's what we're going to leave behind, and it's what history's going to judge us by. Believe it or not, they're going to be looking at our films. They're going to be looking at the the artwork, because that's all we do.
Well, look at what we've done with all the 6 Greek plays that are existing, right? And
we've made an entire curriculum around
a whole culture out of those plays. You're right.
And we know we don't have most of them,
right?
But again, part of being that informed audience is to ask yourself, what is this saying?
Yeah.
And because if you do, then you understand, I think, a show's worth a little bit better than how much money they made at the with their box office receipts.
Right.
And that is what I think changes humanity. But
right.
I'll get off my steps down from soapbox. I
think that's fascinating perspective. And something I probably don't do enough of, even in my own theater going, is unpacking what they're attempting to do. A lot of times what happens is I'll know a show needs to be unpacked, but I don't have anybody to talk about it with, or I don't want to do that work. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And I drive my family nuts.
Right.
I will say that. Like they got to the point when I was, I think it was 15. We went to go see a show, and my parents bought me a ticket 4 rows away from them. Because they're like, you talk all the way through it and we can't enjoy it.
Yes.
So yes. I know I'm weird, but I get it.
I think that's great. Because it is work, and it is work that we need to do, because we can find ourselves. If we're willing to work through it, we can find out something about ourselves or about our culture. And that's always beneficial and instructive. So I think that's good perspective. So thank you for that.
It's all on our way to being great audience members.
That's right. Educating theater goers and enhancing theater going, baby. That's what it's all about. On that note, that'll do it for this episode of the Dr. Broadway podcast. Remember, these professors will be on summer break until early September, potentially late August. We'll let you know. But between now and then, you can connect with us via email at hello@drbroadway.com or on Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok at Dr. Bway.